Afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. So for those who have already, oh, okay. So I have one good afternoon here already. Thanks a lot for uh for saying something. Because I cannot see you, then it feels like I'm not talking to myself. Greetings from Lima, Peru. Hi. That's great. Wonderful. Floripa. Wanuku? Okay, right. São Bernardo. That's okay. So, welcome everyone. My name is Rodrigo Garcia Rosa. I am a professor at Faculdade de Cultura Inglesa, and I also coordinate the post-graduation course there. So, I would like to start by, first of all, um, thanking Giselle for having invited me to talk about something which is really dear to me. Okay, that is the relationship between lexis and grammar. There is just one little thing that I would like to tell you before we actually start discussing this fascinating subject. And that is the presentation that you're about to see is based on an article that was published, that I wrote, and that was published, I think, 2 weeks ago. So it's really, really, really recent. And the title of it is Take the Plunge Using Phraseology to Enhance Learners' Knowledge of Grammar. Okay, so this is the QR code for the article. It's an open access article, so you can scan it and afterwards read about what we're going to discuss. Okay. Um, as for that, the outline of this presentation, the presentation today, is as follows. So I had already prepared those click and show kind of things, but you know we're I'm just going to show everything all at once, right? So the outline for this afternoon is we are at first going to talk about the importance of one area that is called phraseology, right? A lot of people don't know what phraseology is, but you don't have to get spooked away with this big word. It's pretty much the same thing as chunks of language, right? Everybody knows what chunks of language are and how popularized they have become over the years, and that's this basically. So we're basically going to discuss the importance of phraseology to general theories of language, but also to second language learning and teaching. Then, to back us up theoretically, we're going to venture a little bit into one specific view of language, that is the constructional view of language and language acquisition. So, we're going to try to make connections between these two areas of investigation. And then we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the perspective, the cognitive constructional perspective on the acquisition of grammar, second language grammar. And before we go to the juiciest part of this presentation, that is the application, I'm going to give you an example of sort of case study based on a lexical item, which is really, really, really frequent in online English corpora. That is the case of the predicate get, the verb get, and the phraseologism, so the chunks of language that are created, let's say, with this predicate. Okay, so a way into caused motions. And the last thing, I'm going to give you some examples of applications. Does that sound like a plan? I cannot hear you, but I can read. Fantastic. So let's start with the first point. So I told you a little bit about the important that we were going to talk about the importance of phraseology, right? Many of us, when we talk about phraseology or when we think about chunks of language, we instantly think about second language learning and teaching contexts, right? But it's important for us to bear in mind the fact that phraseology is a relevant, say, level of analysis and discussion in various different areas of language investigation. The first one is first language acquisition. So some theorists such as Diesel or Tomasello, for instance, have already verify the importance that chunks of language, the role, the very significant role that chunks of language play in the acquisition of the first language. Adele Goldberg, for instance, is going to say that a child doesn't actually learn the rules of his or her first language to then learn which words should be put in which positions. It's going to be the other way around. So children learn the grammar out of the contexts where specific words are used. So in first language acquisition settings, this is the cognitive perspective, right? Not the formalist perspective, Chomskyan perspective, but to the cognitive perspective on first language acquisition, phraseology is definitely a relevant thing. Needless to say that in second language context settings, and we have many publications going over the relationship, the very close relationship between the learning of a foreign language and phraseology, in other words, chunks of language. We have Alice, both Rod Ellis, but also Nick Ellis, specifically the one that I'm quoting here is Nick Ellis. So Nick Ellis in 1993. Alice and Ferreira Jr. in 2009. Wolf and many other publications are going to emphasize the importance that phraseology has in the acquisition of a second language. In second language teaching, this is pretty much the same thing. So we are all sort of at least acquainted with some methodologies which are going to make use of chunks of language for the teaching of schematic and grammatical constructions. One of them we're going to discuss here, that is the lexical approach. But also, this is a relevant level of investigation for language description too. So it is relevant for first language acquisition settings, second language acquisition settings, second language teaching, but also general language description, right? So those who are concerned with describing how English as such is structured should also worry about the phraseological level of analysis, right? And all of these are also connected, or phraseology more specifically, is definitely a relevant level for other sister areas such as translation, lexicography, and terminology too. Okay. Uh, so recently, over the last, I would say, 10 years, 10 or 15 years, uh, what actually phraseology got so popular and people started studying a little bit more about phraseology because of some technological developments that took place in the area of linguistics. And a fairly recent line of investigation that is called Corpus Linguistics. I don't know how familiarized you are with Corpus Linguistics. So if you could just tell me if you are familiarized, or from 0 to 100, what is the percentage of familiarization you have with? That's right, Coca in the U.S. Right, zero. Somebody said. Um, so basically, corpus linguistics is an empirical investigation of language, right? That is going to look at sets of texts that are going to be compiled. They're going to be put together to serve as a corpus, to serve as a set of data with which we're going to observe the use of language, right? So corpus linguistics takes a very empirical perspective to language, and it doesn't actually talk about the possibilities that language gives us in communicative terms, but rather what are the most probable things to occur in language. Okay, so crudely, set of texts put together to be read electronically, so we use the computer for that. And our objective with this is to observe empirically how language is structured. All right? So, this technological advancement in the area of linguistics, and more specifically, corpus linguistics, has made it possible for phraseology to blossom. Yeah, the area of phraseology to actually gain traction and the attention of researchers. Uh, and then one of the things that we have to do once we diagnose the importance, the relevance of a certain area, at least in linguistics, is we have to define what the unit of analysis is, right? So if we're talking about phraseology, what is phraseology concerned with? Well, phraseology, as the name itself suggests, is concerned with phraseologisms, okay? Phraseologisms, by the way, is going to be a sort of umbrella term for a lot of different kinds of expressions. So, those who are teachers of English or who study linguistics to be English teachers in the future or translators are very acquainted with terms such as chunks of language, idioms, phrasal verbs, proverbs, holographs, formulaic language, multi-word units, etc., etc., etc. Right? So all of these could be put under the umbrella of phraseologism. Right? So phraseologism is this general term that we can use for various different types of strings of words. So sets of words which are going to have some sort of fixedness in their internal structure, right? But in science, what we do is we try as much as possible um, to discretely determine what the units are going to be. And this is a definition by Gries and Stefanowicz from 2004. And they're going to define what a phraseologism is. In other words, they're going to define what a chunk of language is. Okay? They say a phraseologism is defined as the co occurrence of a form or a lemma of, I will explain, of a lexical item and one or more additional linguistic elements of various kinds, which functions as one semantic unit in a clause or sentence and whose frequency of co-occurrence is larger than expected on the basis of chance. Okay? So, some of the keywords that are necessary for us to understand the concept of phraseologism. So, it's the co-occurrence of one form. This form could be a neutralized form. It's not necessarily one specific kind of form. Example, the verb take, for instance. What is the representative of the category of take for all of the declinations that the verb take can have? So we can conjugate the verb take, like take, takes, taking, taken, took, right? All of these are specific instances of one generalized verb, that is take. This generalized verb idea of the verb is what we call lemma, okay? And what is a phraseologism going to be? It's going to be the co-occurrence of a form or a lemma of a lexical item, a word, and one or more additional linguistic elements of various kinds, which function as a semantic unit. So they have one meaning, right? So meaning and level of fixedness are important characteristics for the definition of phraseologisms, okay? So they have to serve as a semantic unit in a clause or sentence. And the frequency of this element has to be larger than expected on the basis of chance. This I won't go into, but it has to do with some sort of statistical measures that we can use to determine whether this what we're seeing in texts is truly significant or not, okay? So once we have considered and defined what a phraseologism is, let us now talk about constructions, which is actually what we're going to talk about today, right? Um, the, the title of this presentation, that is From Lexis to Grammar, could actually be rephrased in a different way. And we could go for something like from phraseologisms to constructions, to grammatical constructions, right? So the word construction, it is very familiar to all of us, right? To all of us who are teachers of English. Um, so we talk about the passive construction, we talk about the conditional construction, the double object construction, etc., etc., etc. However, to Goldberg and to a whole body of researchers within cognitive linguistics, the definition of construction is slightly different from this one. We don't have to worry that much about it, but it's not exactly a synonym to the word structure, for instance, okay? Here we have the definition of constructions given by Goldberg in her latest not latest publication, but the latest the last one, in which she talked about, she gave a definition of a construction. So what is she going to say a construction is? A construction is any linguistic pattern that is recognized. So any linguistic pattern is recognized as a construction as long as some aspect of its form or function is not strictly predictable from its component parts. I will explain that, or from other constructions recognized to exist. In addition, patterns are stored as constructions even if they're fully predictable, as long as they occur with sufficient frequency. Okay? So, can you see some sort of similarities and agreements between the definition of a phraseologism on the one hand and the definition of what constructions are? The objective of this theory of language, that is called construction grammar, is to characterize our tacit knowledge of language, okay? Of any language that we have knowledge about and of. So, considering that the objective of this theory of language is to determine and to explain how we use, process, acquire, store, learn languages, right? Learning languages, be it a first language or a second language, means learning constructions. And how are these constructions going to actually represent linguistic knowledge? In a network format. So this picture that I brought here is not in vain. It's meant to actually demonstrate that the perspective of cognitive linguistics, cognitive constructional perspectives, is that knowledge of language equals a network of constructions. So each one of these nodes equals a linguistic construction that we have in our cognition, all of which are intertwined and interconnected. Is that all right? All right. So what we're going to try to do here for for the remaining part of this talk is to actually say, well, is it possible for us to access this kind of abstract, schematic, okay? And I will be saying a lot this word, schematic. When I say schematic, I mean abstract, more general, right? Schematic, not physical, tangible. Words are physical, they're tangible, we can record them, right? Grammar is something a little bit more abstract. We can't actually exemplify grammatical operations without resorting to words. That's my point, right? So whenever I talk about schematic instructions, I'm actually making reference to very abstract grammatical stuff. So there seems to be a relationship between these things. That is what I'm talking about, right? The relationship between what we call in cognitive linguistics schematic and low-level constructions. Okay, schematic constructions would be these abstract subject, verb, object, oblique arguments on the one hand, and low-level constructions would be the chunks of language. Okay, there seems to be a relationship which I'm going to explain to you in a minute. But before that, um, Goldberg says that further evidence for some amount of redundancy in language comes from the fact that very typically a fully general linguistic pattern is instantiated by a few instances that are highly conventional. In such a case, it is clear that both generalizations and instances are stored. I will explain that. So take everybody with me. Take a look at this. Drive me crazy. How many of you know this expression? Do you know this expression? Yes, everybody does after Britney Spears. Yeah. Drive me nuts. Okay, drive me crazy. That's it. So we can say drive me crazy, but drive him crazy, drive her nuts, drive me bonkers, drive me insane, etc., etc., etc. So it seems that um, us, them, exactly. So it seems that this is a chunk of language, right? Because it has certain aspects of it which are absolutely fixed. So the first thing is we have to use the verb drive. Then there is a slot, which is an open slot that has to be occupied by a nominal expression, be it a pronoun or a noun, right? So drive the audience crazy, for instance, or drive me or drive them crazy. And the second part of the expression that seems to be rather fixed is the adjective crazy, because I can replace it, but I cannot replace for any other thing. I can replace it with some words which somehow denote some sort of insanity, right? So I can say drive me crazy, but drive me bananas, drive me nuts, drive me insane, mad, etc., etc., etc. So, what this theory of language is advocating for basically is that if you know, we know this expression. If you know this expression, if you know how to use this expression, exactly. Somebody said, no one can drive me or anyone happy. Exactly. So we can only drive people and crazy or insane, etc., etc., etc. Right? So what does the theory say? It says basically that um, if we know this expression, right, this is a piece of evidence of the fact that I have stored this little piece of language as one chunk in my cognition, in my network of constructions. All right? So if I know drive me crazy, if I know drive X crazy, then it means that I have stored this thing in my cognition, and this is a small portion of language that I have knowledge of and about. Okay? What is the relationship between schematic and low-level constructions going to say? They're basically going to say the following. If you take a look at drive me crazy, you're going to see that this is an instance. What is an instance? It's an example, right? This is an instance of a more schematic construction. What is this schematic construction? It is subject, verb, object. So what is the subject? She, for instance. She drives me crazy. Subject. Verb, drive. Object, me. The oblique argument is crazy. So this chunk of language has this grammatical structure: subject, verb, object, and oblique structure. Oblique argument, I'm sorry. Okay? Um, and with this formula, let's say, with this scheme, right? That is this one. What can we do with it? We can create other instances, other examples of this kind of construction that is called, this has a name, it's called resultative construction, okay? We can come up with different, if you have the knowledge of this scheme in your cognition, if one of these nodes equals this schematic knowledge here, you're able to put this to use. In other words, you're able to generate new language out of the knowledge that you have of these formulaic stuff. Okay, so you can say things such as drink myself dead, for instance. Okay, or drink myself insane, or laughs I don't know, laugh someone silly. Oh, by the way, there is another one that is very used. Oh, I don't like to go out with her to pubs because she drinks herself silly. Okay, what is this? She drinks herself silly. If we were to say that in Portuguese, we would have to tell a very long story, right? She drinks to the extent that she becomes silly because she got drunk. You know, we would have to go over a lot of words to explain that. But in English, we can do it synthetically this way. She drinks herself silly. Okay? So, in a nutshell, what is the literature going to say? That if we have knowledge of these chunks, internal grammatical structures, and we can make use of that, just like native speakers of every language do, we can make use of that in order to create more generalized knowledge. Okay? Moving on then, what about second language contexts? Somebody said something interesting here. Generalization is the linguistic art that comes with experience. No doubt about this. Exactly the perspective defended by cognitive linguistics. That we make generalizations out of the experiences, the communicative experiences that we have on a regular basis. So, what about second language settings? We talked about first, and we talked about the relationship of these things. But what about second language? What are the theorists going to say? They're basically going to defend that if the units of language are constructions. So, we were discussing, and I told you that for cognitive linguistics, we defend the perspective that knowledge of language equals knowledge of constructions, right? So, it's my network of constructions. Um, so if the units of language are constructions, then language acquisition is the learning of constructions. So second language acquisition depends upon learner's experience of language. That's what was said here recently. So second language depends upon learner's experience of language usage and upon what they can make of it. This is an interesting perspective too, because it doesn't seem to be a very deterministic kind of thing, right? So learners have a say and they have a clear, you know, active and agent perspective in their learning trajectories, okay? So I told you that I was going to talk about one specific phraseologism that was the verb get, the ones with the verb get. So this is based on a previous study of mine that it was actually published in my master's thesis, okay, in 2014. And back then, what I did was I proposed a constructional mapping for the predicate get. My objective with that was to actually demonstrate and to give a case study of language description based on a predicate that was extremely discursively salient. So something that was really frequent, which is the case of the verb get. We all know, right? So back then, what I did was I proposed a sort of constructional mapping for this predicate, get, based on the typology of argument structures proposed, posited in Goldberg 1995, right? What we did we looked at the following collocational context. So I looked at the verb get, the lemmatized version of the verb get. Remember what lemmatized is? I explained a couple of slides ago before. So lemmatized words would be neutralized words, right? So I asked the corpus to give me all of the instances of the verb get, irrespective of their morphological status. So I got things such as get, gets, getting, got, gotten, right? Then I looked for the lemmatized version of the verb get plus an NP, plus collocational complements that were nominal, more specifically. Okay. And for that, the study used corpus linguistics procedures as I have already mentioned, right? And what I did was obviously this generated a number of instances of utterances that was not possible to be analyzed, because the following step would have to be my manual analysis of each one of these sentences. So statistically, what I did was, it's not relevant, but if you are interested, you can read it there. I have selected 5% randomly of all of the instances that we had. Okay, this has left me with 9,210 sentences, utterances that that were meant to be studied. Okay, and I analyzed back then each one of them separately and organized them, let's say, in different argument structure constructions. Right. Out of these 9,210 sentences, 2,449 were examples of analytical causatives, right? Analytical causatives of the three types exemplified here, as well as special case of causative that is called the caused motion construction. This was the main topic of my PhD dissertation. And my interest in this construction actually was born during my master's. Okay, so we have things such as, number one, we should pay the money right away and get our names removed from the book. So this is an example of a past participle causative construction. So get or move or names removed. We have things such as, let's get these people monolithically voting this way and thinking this way. So it's the ing, the gerund causative construction. And the last causative construction, that is the infinitive to construction. I'll get the kids to come pick all this up, right? So three different types of causative constructions and one specific type of causative construction that is special. Conservatives have been more effective in getting their ideas across to the public. So in this kind of construction, the fourth one that we're going to give the name of caused motions, what is happening? Basically, what the name of the construction says. It is a caused motion. So somebody is causing something else to be moved along a path, right? Or towards an end. This is a metaphorical motion, right? Because I'm not literally taking ideas and moving them or causing them to move, but it's still conceptualized, let's say, around the spatial perspective. Okay, so we're still dislocating one thing from one position to another one, even if it is metaphorically. At least we interpret it this way, right? In order for us to interpret the metaphorical interpretation of this sentence, we have to rely on the physical aspect of dislocation. Okay? So from these 2,449 occurrences of causatives, 52.42% were caused motions, were of the type exemplified in number 4. So This definitely seemed to be the most prominent, the most frequent kind of construction, right? And these are some of the characteristics of caused motions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but what is it? It is characterized as follows. It's a syntactic pattern in which the verbal gap must be filled by a non-static verb, static verb, sorry. The oblique argument, that is, here in the example for across to the public, the oblique argument takes the form of a prepositional phrase that indicates the direction towards which the dislocated theme will be caused to move. In that particular case, their ideas, okay? And here we have the form of this construction, so subject, verb, object, oblique, and the function. What is the function of it? The meaning is X causes Y to move Z, okay? So what is this theory of language going to say? That even schematic formulas such as subject, verb, object, and oblique, they have one type of meaning, right? This meaning could be underspecified, okay? Very, very, very definitely not lexicalized, but they do have a meaning, okay? So in cognitive linguistics, these are generally believed to be related to satellite and verb-framed languages. This is by Ptolemy, a slightly different perspective because this perspective defends a lexicalization, patterns of lexicalization, okay? Not necessarily a constructional perspective. Moving on, what we discovered with this data, with GAT, with 1,284 occurrences, but also during my PhD, we discovered that actually caused motions are characterized by a set of different characteristics, okay? So we have 4 different kinds of caused motion constructions. Remember that I was always concerned with the learning of these things by my students, by my learners, right? So my urge to actually describe these grammatical constructions were actually to determine the level of difficulty that my learners would have in order to incorporate these things into their knowledge. So we have 4 different kinds of caused motion constructions. We have the first type that is said to be the easiest one for learners to acquire, to learn. That is the caused motion in which the verb is a perfect fit between the construction because of its true meaning, right? So you can get something or someone into a place, right? This is already predicted by the meaning of the verb. So the meaning of the verb makes it possible for you to express this idea of caused motion. Is that all right? And this oblique argument here, it denotes a literal motion. So it is a verb of instantiation denoting literal motion. I can get you into the house on 2 conditions. So I can get you into the house on 2 conditions. I'm literally, physically taking one person from one position to another. Okay? The second type, instantiation, denoting figurative motion. So we still have the verb, the type of verb that fits perfectly here, but the oblique argument in this particular case is going to be one that denotes a figurative motion. Okay? Guys, can you hear me well? I've been getting some messages here saying that my internet is a bit rowdy. Is it okay? Can you hear me and see me well? Beautiful. Thank you very much for the feedback. Okay, so moving on. I told you about the types of verbs, right? So the type of verb is, let's say, adequate to this particular construction, right? Because the verb put, let's try to think of the argument structure of the verb put. So somebody puts something somewhere, right? So this is the perfect fit between the conceptual structure of the verb and the caused motion construction. However, some other verbs can be found in these constructions, even intransitive verbs as laugh. And this is going to sound a bit odd to some of you. But take a look at this example: removed, taken, extracted from Coca corpus, right? From the corpus of contemporary American English. This example says, "But I guarantee he's going to laugh you out of his office." He's going to laugh you out of his office, right? What is to laugh someone out of one's office? Once again, if we had to say this in Portuguese, we would have to tell a very long story, right? So we would have to say something like, "Oh, they laughed at us so much that we had to exit the office," right? English can do this synthetically. Romance languages apparently cannot do it. Okay, and here the oblique argument denotes a literal place towards which I'm going to be out of which in this particular case I'm going to be taken. And the last kind of caused motion is said to be the most complicated one, or at least that was my hypothesis in my study. That was going to be the most complicated one for learners to acquire because these kinds of caused motions were composed of verbs that were sometimes intransitive, right? So very strange kind of verbs in these positions. And also the oblique argument would denote the motion itself would be a figurative kind of motion, not a physical one, not a literal one. The example to that is, after all, he, with a capital, right? So meaning God, after all, he created it. And I figure anyone who can speak the universe into existence also has the power to control climate. So speak the universe into existence. What is God doing when he speaks? She, whatever, speaks the universe into existence. What is So it's creating the universe by speaking about it, right? This is what this sentence basically means. It means to say that he spoke the universe into existence. So by speaking, the universe was created. This is what I did in 2022 and 2020. I'm sorry. I looked at learner production of those four different types of caused motion constructions, and I was interested in the production of Romance language speakers. So I looked at Brazilian Portuguese speakers learning English, both at the B2 and the C1 levels, but I also looked at the Spanish speakers, Italian, and French speakers. Some of the results I got to were that all of these constructions had a very low level production, even in B2 and C1 levels. And the very few examples that I could find in the corpus that I've consulted, that was EF ChemDet corpus from the University of Cambridge, the very few examples of caused motions were with instantiating verbs. And this is kind of complicated because it doesn't actually say that learners have knowledge of caused motions, right? They could be basically projecting the argument structure of the verbs. This would be like evidence of the knowledge they would have for the verbs. And a lot of them, a lot of the few occurrences in the corpus were also instances of lexicalized phraseologism. So there were lots of chunks of language, things such as breathe new life into, this project is going to breathe new life into her. Okay, this is already a dictionarized caused motion construction. Yeah. So learners were not able to process and produce caused motions, especially those with modifying verbs, especially those kinds of sentences such as the audience left the artist off the stage, right? They couldn't actually process and produce these constructions. So since I am personally concerned with the teaching of language, I particularly believe that teaching should mirror learning. Okay? So by looking at how my learners are going to learn more effectively, I can devise more applied teaching perspectives that are going to actually respect and favor this way of learning coming from my students, right? But I have to empirically verify that a certain thing is either complicated or easy to follow. Okay? So if teaching should mirror learning, that's what I believe in, then we should use what they already know as springboards. This is a motto, right? So we have to start and make use of what they already know in order to construct and to build on this knowledge, right? To construct new types of knowledge. So this is basically what the most current applied perspectives on language teaching are going to defend. So if that is really true, then we could go for some perspectives, since it is really true that learners produced so many phraseologisms, some of which contained these caused motion constructions structures. Why not make use of this knowledge in order to build something new, in order to create some sort of new knowledge, right? What I'm about to present to you then is an example of a learning informed set of teaching tasks. So I'm actually going to present, I'm actually going to present the way that I went about teaching my C1 level students caused motion constructions based on their previous existing knowledge on phraseologisms, right? So this is an example of a learning informed set of teaching tasks. It focuses on a prototypical language presentation phase of a foreign language lesson, and it is based on the observe, hypothesize, and experiment procedure suggested in Lewis 1993. So remember these three words, right? So observe, hypothesize, experiment. We don't necessarily have to go for just one activity per stage, and that's what I'm going to start presenting to you now. So the first one, observing language in use, okay? So if my objective was to teach them schematic caused motions, or at least to make them interpret them correctly, what I did was I selected, we use this text for comprehension reasons. Okay, we were talking about architecture, architecturing. I'm sorry, and but I took the I was focused on discussing this specifically, but I also looked for something that would have some examples of the kind of structure that I wanted to work with my students, right? So this is an article that was published in the Telegraph. And as you can see in the headlines, it says, meet the couple who restored their home into a Victorian time capsule. So meet the couple who restored their home into a Victorian time capsule, right? So the example refers to an article published in the Telegraph, as I said, which was chosen because of its general theme, but also because of the linguistic lexical grammatical strategies it made use of, right? And then first, what I asked learners to do was basically to tackle the text from an informative perspective. We did all of the reading comprehension phases that you're all familiarized with. Then I drew their attention to the headline of this article. And then we went for the more, let's say, interpretative aspect of this article. So after the reading comprehension, learners are asked then to start a task on the interpretation of the language pattern. So I emphasized the headline, right? And I posed a couple of interpretative questions, which you can see here. Which of the sentences below, A, B, or C, best rephrases the headline? So, letter A, meet meet the couple who restored their home and moved to a Victorian capsule. Letter B, meet the couple who refurbished their home and transformed it into a Victorian time capsule. Or C, meet the couple who restored their home as well as a Victorian capsule. So you can tell me what is the right answer to this? It's actually written right here. So the justifications are collected, right, and discussed as to why B is the right answer. So what is the best interpretation to meet the couple who restored their home into a Victorian time capsule? It's letter B. Meet the couple who refurbished their home, and transformed it into a Victorian time capsule, right? So after they have managed to interpret this construction accurately, so it's time for us to observe, still observe a little bit more, interpret, but also categorize this pattern that I'm interested in, right? Um, so this is an example. So learners, I have taken some concordance lines from Colca and presented it to them, right? So learners were presented with this, and they were asked to sort and categorize the construction. So they were asked to spot where in these 6 sentences they could find instances that were similar to the previous construction that we looked at. So they're expected to spot the get phraseologisms with the caused motion form. So get that point across to him, get his life back on track, get your food in the door, and get my hands around the nets. And the third question, question number 3, can be used to start systematizing the form of the structure. So is there anything in common amongst them? So, oh, it seems that we have a verb here, we have something else which is represented by the object, and we have a place towards which this is being dislocated. So in this part, I started the systematization process with students after they were able to spot uh, whole hypothesizing about the structure. This time with the highlighted parts, the highlighted cause phraseologisms, I a couple of questions so that I could work collaboratively and them. So in number 1, where categories below would you place chunks with that? These in this formal structure, so in one in which we have verb, object, preposition, and noun. Uh, in this structure, verb, object, and adjective, and some examples. Or in this one, verb, object, and past participle, and some examples, right? Um, and the second question was, so the first one was meant to tackle form, and the second one was meant to tackle meaning. So which of the following meanings do these expressions convey? Oh, some people are saying, I'm breaking up. Um, Problems with the audio now. Guys, can you hear me well? Somebody's writing. Okay, I'm just gonna go on because of the time. It's better now. Beautiful, beautiful. So the first question is meant to tackle the form of this construction, right? So they were supposed to actually figure out that these constructions are similar to the ones in the first box. And the second question, which of the following meanings do these expressions convey? We have three options. So somebody causes something to move somewhere, somebody causes something to move something else, or somebody causes something to be complete. The right meaning to that caused motion is somebody causes something to move somewhere, right? So they were supposed to go all of these questions, and the teacher obviously mediating this analytical process. Um, Still on the hypothesizing phase about the structure. So in order to demonstrate the fact that tangible expressions such as get that point across to him, all of these, but also put it out of its misery, talk some sense into her, breathe new life into it, are all examples of the schematic caused motion. What is the schematic caused motion represented by? It's represented by this formula: verb, object, preposition, and noun. And we have a chunk of language that has that particular structure, right? So put them out of their misery. So what I wanted them to do was to abstract away and verify how we can go from a very concrete lexical item, such as put them out of their misery, to something as schematic as verb, object, preposition, and noun. In the last part, which is called experimenting with the structure, so what I did was I removed some other concordance lines with caused motion constructions from the corpus, removed the verbs, included no, I did not include in this one an extra verb, and then I asked them to place the verbs back. So read the sentences taken from the corpus, use the verb below to produce similar simple possible sentences. You can use more than one verb in each sentence. So because of the time, I'm going to simply show you the answer, right? So we would discuss and come up with the answers, right? And there I said um, you can use more than one verb in each sentence, right? Because if you take a look at the first one, if you walk into the police with a half-cooked story, the right answer, I mean, the original answer is they're going to laugh us out of the station. They're going to laugh us out of the station. But I could have said beat, right? They're going to beat us out of the station. Yeah? So, and then we would obviously mediate this discussion and say which ones were possible, which ones were not possible, and why these are not possible. The very last part of this lesson revolved around a practice, right? In which they were asked to get a little bit creative, just like the writer of that article was. So I projected all of the phraseologisms, the causal motion phraseologisms that we have seen during the lesson, and I asked them to create in groups headlines similar to the Meet the Couple Who Restored Their Home into a Victorian Time Capsule, being creative, humorous, and using these expressions. Okay? So I'm reaching the conclusions now. So the relationship between lexicalized expressions and schematic constructions is a true thing. And this, theoretically speaking, makes all the sense in the world. So it wouldn't be impossible for us then to make use of what students already know in order to build and create something new, right? Known lexical material can, in this regard, and should be used as springboards to the development of grammatical knowledge. And I would like to finish with a seminal quote, a quotation from a seminal paper by Nottinger and DiCarico, in which they say, The goal would not be to have students analyze just those chunks introduced in the lessons, of course, but to have them learn to segment, to have them, students, learn to segment and construct new patterns of their own on analogy with the kind of analysis they do in the classroom. So this means learner training and learner autonomy. We do it in the classroom and they do it after on their own. I hope you have enjoyed this talk. I hope it wasn't that complicated to all of you. We've reached the end of today's talk, but I can still be here for a couple of minutes to answer questions if you need them, if you need to ask them. Thank you very much. Denise asked me, can I use this with A1 and A2 pupils? The perspective on chunks of language, definitely, definitely, Denise. But I wouldn't teach caused motion constructions to an A1, A2 level group of learners, you know. But the idea of using phraseology to teach them something is a very powerful one. For example, inversion, for instance, you know, we have, you know, everyday kind of things that have this kind of grammatical construction. So this shouldn't be a problem for them. I think we still have time for one question. I hope you have enjoyed then. It seems that we don't have any other question. Thank you very much for participating, for bearing with me for this 1 hour, and see you in the future. Bye bye.